I should begin with the first protocol, though I know you won't understand it yet. None of us did. That's the design, you see. The perfect design. My name was Valence Court, and for 11 years I processed heretic disposition files in Subsector Administrative Complex 17, Hive Secundus, on a world whose name I was never cleared to know. The work was simple. Forms came in through the pneumatic tubes, each one a parchment summary of an individual's transgressions, their interrogation results, their final disposition. I would read them, verify the stamps and signatures, cross-reference against the Sector Heresy Index, and file them in the appropriate vault. Green seal meant execution, red seal meant penal servitude, black seal meant something else, something I wasn't authorized to know. The first protocol was mentioned in exactly 3 files during my entire tenure. Just 3, out of approximately 47,000 cases I processed. The phrase appeared in the special instructions field, written in that particular crimson ink the Inquisition uses, the kind that looks wet no matter how old the document. Subject flagged under first protocol. Maintain observation. Do not terminate. That was all it ever said. I remember the sound of the complex more than anything else. The pneumatic system ran constantly, a rhythmic hiss and thump that became the heartbeat of my existence. Documents arriving, documents departing, the scratch of my stylus against parchment, the rustle of robes as menials moved between the vault chambers, and underneath it all, the low industrial groan of the hive itself, that omnipresent reminder that we existed in a wound carved into the planet's surface, surrounded by billions of other wounds just like it. The air tasted of recycled breath and old paper. We weren't permitted windows. Our light came from lumens that flickered at the edge of perception, just enough to make you question whether the darkness at the corner of your vision was real or imagined. I worked a 14-hour shift, 6 days per week, with the 7th reserved for mandatory devotional attendance. This had been my life since I was 23 years old. I was 34 when I processed the first file that mentioned my own name. It wasn't my file, you understand. It was a cultist's file. A woman named Thessaly Quan, arrested during a raid on an underhive prayer circle, standard chaos, corruption. She'd been found with prohibited texts, marks carved into her arms, the usual degradations. Her interrogation had been thorough, 12 pages of confession, mostly incoherent pleading and accusations. She'd named 17 others. And there, on page 7, my name appeared in her rambling testimony. Valence Court knows about the waiting. Valence Court understands the pattern. He sees the marks we cannot see. I read that passage 4 times before my hands started shaking. The pneumatic tube hissed. Another file arrived. I processed it automatically, my training overriding my panic. Then I read the Quan file again. My name was right there, in her confession, in her handwriting. Even they'd made her write parts of it herself. But I didn't know anyone named Thessaly Quan. I'd never been to the Underhive. I'd certainly never attended any Chaos Prayer Circle. The logical explanation was that she'd been tortured into madness, that she'd grabbed at random names from the Hive census, that it meant nothing. But the file had been flagged, Black Seal. Subject flagged under First Protocol. Maintain observation. Do not terminate. I did what I was trained to do. I processed the file. I stamped it, dated it, filed it in Vault 7 where all the Black Seal cases went. Then I went home to my hab unit and tried to sleep through the sound of the pneumatic system that seemed to have followed me, that seemed to be hissing my name now, over and over. That was 6 years ago. The investigation didn't announce itself. There was no dramatic arrest, no midnight raid. Instead, small things began to change. My shift supervisor, a Dow woman named Kellen who'd barely spoken to me in a decade, started asking questions. Casual ones, at first. Had I noticed any irregularities in recent files? Did I maintain any personal documentation of my work? Had anyone approached me outside the complex? I answered truthfully, no, no, and no. She nodded and made notes in a small book she'd never carried before. The menials stopped making eye contact with me. I'd never been friendly with them. They were servitors. Mostly lobotomized workers, with just enough cognition left to file papers and clean floors. But I'd always nodded at the organic ones, the penal workers who retained some humanity. Now they looked through me as if I'd already been erased. My devotional attendance was monitored more carefully. I'd always attended, always recited the proper prayers. But now I noticed a figure in the back of the chapel, a woman in an inquisitorial rosette, who never prayed, never sang, just watched. She was tall, her face hidden behind a rebreather mask that hissed softly with each breath. I began to think of her as the silent interrogator, though I didn't know if she was actually an interrogator or just an agent. She never approached me. She just watched. I started finding files. Not delivered through the pneumatic system, just appearing on my desk when I wasn't looking. They were always cultist cases, always Black Seal, always flagged under First Protocol. And they all mentioned me, not by name, always, but in ways that were unmistakable. The clerk who sees patterns, the one who files our truths, Court, who serves the throne of paper and ash. I stopped sleeping. The sound of footsteps in the corridor outside my hab unit would wake me, slow and deliberate, stopping right outside my door. But when I checked the peephole, no one was there. Just an empty corridor, and the distant groan of the hive settling. I started keeping count of the footsteps. 13 steps, from the elevator to my door. Always 13. Always stopping. At work, I began to notice the pattern Thessaly Kwan had mentioned. It wasn't anything supernatural, nothing chaotic or corrupted. It was bureaucratic. The files flagged under First Protocol weren't random. They followed a sequence, a progression. The first file would mention the waiting. The second would mention the pattern. The third would mention the marks. Then the cycle would repeat, with variations, waiting, pattern, marks, over and over, across years, across dozens of cultists who'd been arrested in different hive sectors, who couldn't possibly have known each other. They were all describing the same thing. They were all describing the Inquisition's methodology. I should have reported this realization. That was the correct procedure. Any observation of note should be immediately submitted to my supervisor. But I didn't. I think, somewhere deep in my training-numbed mind, I understood that reporting it would be the final proof, the final confirmation that I'd seen what I wasn't supposed to see. So I stayed silent and continued processing files, and the silent interrogator continued watching from the back of the chapel, and the footsteps continued outside my door each night. Then came the morning I found my own file. It arrived through the normal pneumatic tube, thumping into the inbox with that familiar hiss. I opened it reflexively, my hands moving through the ritual of unsealing, unfolding, reading. The header said, Court, Valence, Subsector Admin Complex 17. Heretical suspicion, pending. The document was dated 3 weeks prior. 3 weeks. It had been circulating through the inquisitorial bureaucracy for 3 weeks before arriving back at my desk. The interrogation report was blank. The evidence section was blank. But the disposition was not. Subject flagged under First Protocol. Maintain observation. Do not terminate. I was a case file. I had always been a case file. My hands didn't shake this time. I felt very calm, very distant, as if I were watching myself from somewhere outside my body. I processed my own file exactly as I'd processed 47,000 others. I stamped it. I dated it. I filed it in Vault 7, in the appropriate drawer, in alphabetical order, K for Court. Between Corliss and Kostya, 2 other names I remembered from other files, other confessions. Then I went to the chapel for my daily devotional, and the silent interrogator was gone. Her spot in the back row was empty. I almost laughed. The sound died in my throat when I realized everyone else in the chapel was staring at me. Not openly, their heads were bowed in prayer, but I could feel their attention like heat on my skin. They knew. They'd all known. Maybe since the beginning. The message came during the evening devotional, delivered by a servitor whose augmetic jaw clicked with each word. Valence Court. You are summoned for consultation. Interrogation Chamber 9, tomorrow, dawn. I acknowledged the summons. I went home. I didn't pack. What would be the point? The footsteps came that night. As always, 13 steps from the elevator to my door, but this time they didn't stop. This time the door opened, though I'd locked it, though I'd chained it. The silent interrogator stood in my doorway, backlit by the corridor lumens, her rebreather hissing. She didn't speak. She handed me a data slate and left. The door closed itself. The locks engaged. The slate contained a single document, the complete list of everyone who'd ever been flagged under First Protocol in my subsector. There were hundreds of names. I recognized dozens of them, cultists I'd processed, heretics I'd filed away. But the list went further back than my tenure. It went back decades. And at the very top, marked with that crimson ink, was a name that made me drop the slate. Interrogator Mellus Court. My grandfather, dead 40 years, whom I'd been named after, who'd served the Inquisition with such distinction that his portrait hung in the complex's hall of service. He'd been flagged under First Protocol. He'd been under observation his entire career, and he'd never known, or he'd known and served anyway, and now I was part of the same sequence, the same pattern, the same waiting. I went to Interrogation Chamber 9 at dawn. I went because there was nowhere else to go, no one to run to, no way out of a system that had contained me since before I was born. The chamber was exactly as I'd imagined from processing thousands of reports. Stone walls weeping condensation, a steel chair with restraints, lumens positioned to cast no shadows. But it was empty. No interrogator waited for me. Just another data slate on the chair, and a note in crimson ink. You understand now. You have always understood. This is what the First Protocol means. Observation creates the observed. Suspicion generates the suspect. We do not hunt cultists caught. We cultivate them. We plant the seeds in files and forms, in late-night footsteps and chapel watches, and we wait for them to grow. Some resist, some flee, some break, and some, the special ones. The ones marked from birth, they process their own files and file them away and continue serving. Because they understand that the system is perfect, that escape was never an option, that they were always meant to be both clerk and cultist, observer and observed. The note continued. You have processed 47,312 cases. Every one of them was flagged under First Protocol. Every one of them is still under observation. Every one of them believes they escaped, or died, or were purged. But the Inquisition never terminates. We maintain, we observe, we file. And now you will help us, as your grandfather helped us, as everyone marked with your blood has helped us. You will return to your desk. You will continue processing files, and you will understand that every name you read is a name that was always waiting to be read. Every confession was always waiting to be written. Every observation was always waiting to be made. This is why cultists never escape the Inquisition, because there are no cultists. There is only the observation. There is only the waiting. There is only the pattern. I should have felt horror. I should have felt betrayal or rage or despair. But what I felt was recognition. A deep, terrible recognition that some part of me had always known this, had understood it in the rhythm of the pneumatic tubes, in the scratch of stylus on parchment, in the hiss of the silent interrogator's breath. The system was perfect because it was complete. It had no outside. It had no end. It just continued, processing and filing and observing. Forever. I returned to my desk. I processed files. The silent interrogator returned to the chapel, watching. The footsteps continued each night, 13 steps, stopping at my door, and I began to understand the marks that Thessaly Quan had seen, the marks we all see eventually. They're not chaos sigils or heretical symbols. They're the stamps on our files. They're the seals that mark us for observation. They're the ink that writes our names into the pattern. Green seal means execution. Red seal means penal servitude. Black seal means you were never meant to escape. because you were never separate from the system to begin with. You were always the cultist and the clerk, the heretic and the investigator, the observed and the observer. The first protocol is simple. Watch long enough, and everyone becomes what you're watching for. I've been processing files for 6 years since I learned this. My file circulates somewhere in the bureaucracy, being stamped and dated and filed by someone who doesn't know yet that they're processing themselves, that their name is already written in someone else's confession, that the footsteps are already counting down their corridor. The pneumatic tubes hiss, the papers rustle, the lumens flicker, and I understand, finally, what my grandfather understood, what every court has understood since the first one swore service to the Inquisition. We are the pattern. We are the waiting. We are the marks that others cannot see until it's too late, until they're sitting at their own desk, reading their own file, and realizing that the question was never, why don't cultists escape? The question was always, what makes someone a cultist? And the answer, the terrible, perfect answer, is this: being observed makes you guilty. Being filed makes you heretical. Being suspected makes you corrupted. The Inquisition doesn't discover heresy. It creates it through the simple act of investigation. Every question plants a doubt. Every doubt becomes a confession. Every confession proves the original suspicion was justified. I am guilty because I am suspected. I am heretical because I am observed. I am corrupted because I am filed. And so are you. Reading this now, wondering if your name has appeared in some cultist's confession, wondering if there's a file with your name making its way through the pneumatic tubes, wondering if the footsteps you hear at night are just your imagination or something more. That wondering is enough. It's always been enough. The day I truly understood this, not intellectually, but in my bones, in my blood, was the day I found the second file with my name. Not my case file. A different one. This one listed me as the investigating agent. Me, Valence Court, low-level file clerk, now designated as an inquisitorial operative. The file detailed an investigation I had supposedly conducted into a suspected chaos cult operating in subsector Administrative Complex 17. My investigation had led to 17 arrests, 12 executions, and 5 ongoing observations under First Protocol. I had never conducted any investigation. I had never arrested anyone. But the file was complete, signed with my name in handwriting that matched my own, stamped with seals I recognized, filled with details that could only have come from someone with intimate knowledge of the complex's operations, which I had, because I'd spent 11 years processing files, learning the patterns, understanding the marks. The file proved I was an agent. My earlier file proved I was a suspect. Both files were true. Both files were me. I began finding more files after that. Sometimes I was the investigator, sometimes I was the observed, sometimes I was a witness, naming others in confessions I didn't remember making. The pneumatic tubes delivered these files at random, or what seemed random, though I began to suspect there was a deeper pattern I couldn't quite see, a meta-pattern that governed when I would be shown evidence of my own multiplicity. The silent interrogator and I developed a strange relationship. She never spoke, I don't think she could, not with that rebreather permanently affixed to her face, but she would appear at significant moments. When I processed a particularly disturbing confession, she would be in the chapel that evening, nodding slightly as I entered. When I found a file that contradicted another file, she would be standing in my corridor when I left work, just standing there, breathing. The hiss of her rebreather became another rhythm in my life, another heartbeat to match the pneumatic tubes. One evening, I stayed late at the complex. Everyone else had gone to their hab units or their devotionals. I was alone in the vault chamber, surrounded by millions of files, and I began pulling cases at random. I wanted to test something. I wanted to see if the pattern held. It did. Every file I pulled, no matter how random the selection, connected to every other file. A cultist arrested in 873. M41 had confessed under torture that she'd been recruited by someone matching the description of a man executed for heresy in 869. M41, 4 years before her recruitment, supposedly occurred. That man's file mentioned a symbol he'd carved into his cell wall, and that same symbol appeared in the confession of a woman investigated in 891. M41, decades later. Her file mentioned a prayer she'd heard, and that prayer was transcribed word for word in the file of a man who'd been flagged in 854. M41, 23 years before she was born. The files weren't documenting a sequence of events. They were documenting a timeless pattern, a structure that existed outside causality. The Inquisition wasn't tracking the spread of heresy. It was tracking the revelation of something that had always been there, waiting to be observed. I pulled my grandfather's file. Interrogator Mellus Court, flagged under First Protocol in 782. M41, the year he joined the Inquisition. His file was thick, decades of observations, and I read through it in the dim lumens of the empty vault. He'd spent his entire career investigating a cult he called the Waiting Throne, a heretical sect that supposedly worshipped not the chaos gods, but the act of observation itself, the divine power of being seen and recorded and filed. He'd never found any members of this cult, but his investigation had led to hundreds of arrests, thousands of observations. Everyone he'd ever suspected had eventually confessed, had eventually described the same symbols and prayers and patterns. Near the end of his file, there was a note in his own handwriting. I understand now that the Waiting Throne is not an organization. It is a state of being. Everyone under observation becomes a member. Everyone who waits to be discovered has already been discovered. The cult exists because we are looking for it. I am not investigating heretics. I am creating them, and I cannot stop, because stopping would mean admitting the Inquisition's power comes not from truth, but from observation, and that admission would be the greatest heresy of all. The next page was his death certificate, killed in action during a raid on a suspected cult gathering. But the page after that, the page that shouldn't have been there, was a transfer order, assigning Interrogator Mellus Court to deep cover operations in Subsector Administrative Complex 17, dated 5 years after his death. I heard the footsteps then, not in the corridor outside my hab unit. Here, in the vault, 13 steps from the entrance to where I stood. The silent interrogator emerged from the shadows between filing cabinets. She was carrying something, a rebreather mask, identical to her own. She held it out to me. I understood. Of course I understood. The pattern was complete. I was my grandfather, not metaphorically, literally. The files proved it. My entire life had been a cover identity, a role I'd played so thoroughly I'd forgotten it was a role. Valence Court the clerk was an investigation. Valence Court the grandson was a legend. Interrogator Mellus Court had never died. He'd just been reassigned. To himself. To me. To the observation of his own observation. I took the rebreather. The silent interrogator helped me affix it to my face. The straps were tight. The seal perfect. I could hear my own breath now, amplified, hissing in that same rhythm I'd been hearing for years. She removed her own mask, and beneath it was my face, or a face like mine, or my face as it would be in 20 years. Scarred and aged and wrong in ways I couldn't quite name. She smiled. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was my voice roughened by decades of breathing through filters. You're ready for the next phase. The observation is complete. Now we file you away and begin again. Begin what? I asked. But I knew. I'd always known. The first protocol, she said. The observation of the next observer. Your children, your colleagues, everyone who will wonder why you stopped coming to work, everyone who will process the file about your disappearance. We'll flag them all. We'll watch them all. And some of them, the special ones, will eventually stand where you're standing, holding a mask, understanding that the cultists never escape, because the cultists are us. We are the Inquisition, and we are the heretics we hunt. The system is perfect because it feeds on itself. She took my hand, her hand was cold, augmetic beneath synthetic skin, and led me deeper into the vault, to a section I'd never been authorized to enter. The files here were ancient, dating back to before the hive's founding, before the planet's colonization. They were handwritten on actual parchment, crumbling with age, but the words were the same words I'd been reading for 11 years, the same confessions, the same observations, the same pattern. The Inquisition didn't invent the first protocol, she said. We discovered it, or it discovered us. Somewhere in the dark age of technology, some administrator realized that observation creates reality, that suspicion generates guilt, that the act of investigation produces the crime it seeks. They tried to destroy the knowledge, they tried to burn the files. But you can't destroy a pattern by destroying its documentation. You just make the pattern more powerful, more hidden, more inevitable. She pulled out a file so old it was barely legible. The name on it was written in a script I didn't recognize, in a language that predated Imperial Gothic, but I could read it anyway, because I'd been reading it my whole life, because it was my name in every language that had ever been spoken. The one who watches. This is the first file, she said. The original observation. And this, she pulled out another file, crisp and new, is the latest. Filed this morning. Your replacement has already started processing cases. Their name is Valence Court. They don't know they're me yet. They don't know they're you. But they will. They'll process the files. They'll notice the patterns. They'll find their own name in someone's confession. And eventually, they'll stand here, holding a mask, understanding that there is no escape, because there was never anything to escape from. How many? I asked. How many Valence Courts? She smiled again. How many files are in this vault? Multiply that by every vault, in every complex, in every subsector. We are infinite. We are the Inquisition's true secret. Not that we hunt heretics, but that we are heretics, hunting ourselves, observing ourselves, flagging ourselves under protocols we created to justify our own existence. The mask hissed with each breath I took. The sound was comforting now, familiar. I understood why she'd worn it all these years. It marked her as separate from the unobserved, from those who still believed in the simple binary of loyal and heretical. We were both. We were neither. We were the observation itself, incarnate and eternal. She led me to a door I'd never seen, hidden behind a filing cabinet in the deepest part of the vault. Beyond it was a corridor lined with doors, hundreds of them, each one marked with a name. I saw my grandfather's name. My name. Names I'd processed. Names I'd never heard. All of them flagged under first protocol. These are the observation chambers, she said. Each one contains an observer watching another observer watching another observer. Infinite regression. Perfect bureaucracy. You'll take your place in one of these rooms. You'll watch the next Valence Court process files. You'll be the silent interrogator in their chapel, the footsteps in their corridor, and when they're ready, when they've understood the pattern, you'll bring them here and show them their mask and explain that the cultists never escape because we are the cultists. We have always been the cultists, and our greatest heresy is pretending otherwise. I wanted to ask why. Why create this system? Why perpetuate it? But the answer was, in every file I'd ever processed, every confession I'd ever read, the system existed because observation was power, and power needed to justify itself, and justification required threats to observe. The Inquisition couldn't exist without heretics, so it made heretics. It made them so thoroughly, so perfectly, that the heretics themselves became inquisitors, became observers, became the system that created them. One question, I said. My voice sounded strange through the rebreather, mechanized, depersonalized. Is there anyone outside the pattern? Anyone who isn't flagged, isn't observed, isn't part of the first protocol? She considered this. There might have been, once, before the first file was written, before the first observation was made. But the moment someone wondered if there were heretics to find, the moment someone decided to look, that moment created the pattern. And the pattern, once established, is retroactive. It reaches backward and forward through time, flagging everyone who might have been observed, everyone who might be observed, everyone who is being observed right now without knowing it. So the answer is no. The answer is, the question itself makes you part of the pattern. By asking if there's an outside, you've proven you're inside. That's the genius of it. That's the perfection. She opened one of the doors. Inside was a room identical to Interrogation Chamber 9. Stone walls, steel chair, carefully positioned lumens. But instead of being empty, this room contained another person in a rebreather mask, sitting absolutely still, watching a screen that showed a file clerk processing documents. I recognized the clerk. It was me, from 6 years ago, the day I'd first seen my name in Thessaly Quan's confession. "You've been watching yourself this whole time," she said, "learning to see yourself as the Inquisition sees you, and now you'll watch the next iteration do the same. And someday, when the pattern calls for it, you'll file your own death certificate and transfer yourself to another identity, another observation, another endless waiting." I took my place in the chamber. The screen showed my replacement, the new Valence court processing a file. Their hands moved with the same efficiency mine once had. They didn't know yet. They wouldn't know for years, but they would learn. As I learned, as my grandfather learned, as everyone marked under the first protocol eventually learns. The silent interrogator closed the door. I heard her footsteps recede, 13 steps back to the vault entrance. The pneumatic tubes hissed somewhere in the complex. A file arrived at my replacement's desk. They opened it, read it, processed it without seeing their own name hidden in the documentation. Not yet, but soon. I watch the screen. I breathe through my mask. The sound is rhythmic, meditative, eternal. I am the observer observing the observer observing the observed. I am the cultist hunting cultists. I am the pattern recognizing itself in every face, every file, every confession. This is why cultists never escape the Inquisition. Because we are the Inquisition. We have always been the Inquisition. And the moment you wondered if you might be under observation, the moment you noticed the pattern, the moment you asked yourself if your name might appear in someone's file, that moment, you joined us. The first protocol doesn't catch cultists. It creates observers. And observers, given enough time, given enough files to process and patterns to notice, inevitably observe themselves into heresy. The system is perfect because it is closed. There is no escape because there is no outside. There is only the observation, the filing, the waiting. And now, you're part of it too. By reading this, by wondering if it's true, by questioning whether your name might be in someone's file right now, you're flagged, you're observed, you're waiting to be processed. We all are. We've always been. That's what the first protocol means. The screen shows my replacement noticing something in a file. Their hands pause, their head tilts slightly, the way mine did 6 years ago. The pattern continues. The observation creates the observed. The system feeds itself. I settle into my chair for the long watch. Somewhere in the complex, the pneumatic tubes deliver another file. Somewhere in the Imperium, another clerk processes another confession. Somewhere in time, the first observer watches the first file and makes the first note in crimson ink. Subject flagged under first protocol. Maintain observation. Do not terminate. The hiss of my breath fills the chamber. I am home. I am eternal. I am the reason cultists never escape. Because I am the cultist. And so are you. And so is everyone who ever wondered if they might be. Welcome to the pattern. You've been here all along,